All right, welcome to section 3.5, adding and subtracting decimals. As always, go ahead and pause and write down the information. Make sure you're leaving quite a bit of room here so we can actually add and subtract these numbers. So first of all, I want to just go ahead and go over our rules. Okay, so the rules for adding and subtracting decimals, there's just two of them. Okay, you're going to line up the decimal points, and this is the most important thing. All right, so it should be decimal point over decimal point. So let's go ahead and do it for this first one. So I have 0.16, and the decimal point for 0.77 or 77 hundredths will go directly underneath. Okay, here's my addition sign. It has to be lined up. And for these, it's easy just because there's the same amount of numbers on the top and the bottom. But as we get into this, you'll see what the importance of lining up your decimal points. Okay, step 2. Add zeros to the end of the decimal when necessary, and then add and subtract as you would a whole number. So what that means is if I have, for example, 0.5, and I am subtracting 0.25, we want to add zeros at any blank spots. Okay, it doesn't change the meaning of the decimal, but what it does is it helps us then to subtract. Okay, and then you'll see once again the decimal over decimal. Now I have two numbers and two numbers. Okay, so I'm going to go ahead and add and subtract like normal. So 6 plus 7 is 13. I'm going to carry the 1. 1 plus 1 is 2. 2 plus 7 is 9. Okay, and then 0 plus 0 is 0. All right, now we need to add an extra rule. It's not here at the bottom. And that's what to do with your decimal point. And you just drop the decimal point down. If I can get my pen to work here. Okay, so we're going to drop the decimal straight down. Okay, so this decimal point is just going to drop here, and my answer is 0.93 or 93 hundredths. All right, let's go ahead and do it for the next one. So once again, I'm just going to put the top number, and it's important that you put this first number first, especially for subtraction, and put 0.08 or 8 hundredths underneath, and I'm subtracting. Now it's the same rules, so when I do 2 minus 8, I can't do it. I have to borrow. And I'm borrowing from the 5 and making the 5 a 4, and then adding a 1, or a 10 actually, to the 2. So now this becomes 12 minus 8, and we know 12 minus 8 is 4. 4 minus 0 is 4. 0 minus 0 is 0. And then like we said before, we're going to drop that decimal point down. So my answer is 44 hundredths. Okay, so this is basically, in a lot of ways, the same as just normal adding and subtracting. You just have to remember to line up the decimal points and then to continue to drop that decimal point down. Okay? All right. So we're going to practice some rounding, and the reason we need to practice some rounding is because sometimes we're going to go ahead and round. So this is going to give us a little review from the day before. So if you remember with rounding, we're going to underline the hundredth spot, okay, and look behind. If the number is 5 or above, we round up. If it's below 5, we round down. Okay, so I have a 0, so it's below 5, so it's going to be 2.61. Remember, we do not include any numbers after the hundredth spot. So 2 and 61 hundredths is my answer. Okay, next is the ones spot, which is in front of the decimal point. Whenever you get stuck on these and you're not sure what the place value should be, you should always look back. Okay, so I have a 9. The 9 tells me to round up, and what am I rounding up? The 6. So that becomes a 7. And then don't forget, this is gone. We take away all of the numbers behind, and 7 is my answer. Okay, the tens spot. Notice how it's not the tenths. So the tens spot is before the decimal. And I'm looking back at the 1 spot, which is a 9, and we know because it's 5 or above, we're going to add 1 to the underlying number. So I get 1, 2, 2, and then don't forget, because it's in front of the decimal, I have to add that extra 0, so it makes sense. Okay, we can't just change 1,219 to 122. So it's 1,220. And then the last one is the tenths spot. This is my tenths spot. I look back at the hundreds. It is below 5, so I'm going to keep that underlying number the same, and I get 0.5, or 0 and 5 tenths. Okay, so that's a little bit of review for rounding. Let's go ahead and review our comparing decimals. And if you remember, when we compare decimals, we're going to line up the decimal points once again and compare place value to place value. Okay, so I have a 6 and a 6, so I need to keep going, and then a 1 and a 2, and I'm going to stop because I have different numbers, and I know that the 2 is greater than the 1, so 2 and 121 thousandths is going to be less than 6 and 2 tenths, so it's going to eat the larger number. Do the same thing for 6, and I have 40.9 over 40.90. Okay, I'm going to annex. We call that annexing zeros, and that just means I'm going to add zeros to any blank spots. Okay, so I have a 4 and a 4, a 0 and a 0, a 9 and a 9, a 0 and a 0. So all of my numbers are the same, so that means that these are equivalent. They're equal to one another. Okay, so it just gives you a little background, a little review of what we've been doing so far. Now let's get into our adding and subtracting. Okay, now the reason I'm using this grid paper is that sometimes for people it's easier to line up the numbers if it's on grid paper. Okay, so I have 23 and 1 tenth plus 5 and 8 tenths, and you should always line one on top of the other. So I have 23 decimal point 1 over 5.8. Okay, now you notice I have a blank spot, so I'm going to add zeros there, and now I'm going to add. Always starting from the right to the left. So 1 plus 8 is 9. Drop that decimal point down. 3 plus 5 is 8. And 2 plus 0 is 2. Okay, and there's my solution. All right. Okay, so just line up the decimal points, add or subtract like normal, and drop the decimal point down. Now I have 5 and 77 hundredths, and I'm subtracting 2 and 371 thousandths. I need to add my 0 to any open spots. So I'm going to add my 0 here, and now I'm going to subtract. I can't do 0 minus 1, so I'm going to borrow from the 7 and make it a 6. Add my 1 or my 10 to the 0, and that becomes 10 minus 1, which we know is 9. Now I can't do 6 minus 7, so I need to borrow again. So this 7 here is going to become a 6, and I'm going to add my 1, and I get 16 minus 7. And we know 16 minus 7 is also 9. Okay? And now I go my next one, 6 minus 3. I do not have to borrow for this one. 6 minus 3 is 3. Drop my decimal point straight down. And 5 minus 2 is 3 as well. Okay, make sure your number is smaller than that top number we should be subtracting, so they should be getting smaller. And my answer is 3 and 399 thousandths. Okay, we just have one last problem to go through. And I have a 6. Now 6 is a whole number. And we know, and hopefully we know, if it's a whole number, it's a ones place. And if it's a ones place or a tens place or a hundreds place, we know all those numbers go in front of the decimal. So I'm going to put my decimal behind the 6. And I'm going to line up, once again, my 4 and 78 hundredths, which means I'm going to have to add some zeros here, which is fine. Now I can't do 0 minus 8, okay? And I can't really borrow from the 0 because I can't do 0 minus 7. All right, I don't have anything to borrow. So I'm going to borrow all the way from the 6. The 6 is going to become a 5. And then I translate over that to just the immediate next one to the right, and that becomes a 10. Okay, so now I can borrow from that 10 and make it a 9 and add the 1 to my 0, which makes it a 10. So 10 minus 8 is 2. 9 minus 7 is 2. Drop the decimal point down. And 5 minus 4 is 1. Please remember that when you're subtracting, the top number has to be larger than the smaller number. Okay, I can't say 0 minus 8 is 8. That does not make sense. Okay, so you're always borrowing, and our numbers are not going to be negative, so don't change anything to negative. We haven't even talked about that this year. Okay, so stay consistent. All right. That's it for today, and go ahead, if you have any questions, make sure you circle them, and you can ask me tomorrow while you're working on your homework. All right, have a great night.